Hey guys, I'm Hannah Cox with Base Politics, and you're watching the Base Politics Show. America was officially in a hostage situation earlier this week as a radical group of hoodlums seized control of 36 of the country's shipping ports and threatened to cripple the supply chain along with the economy unless their demands were met. All while the Appalachian region of the country is in a state of emergency and in desperate need of basic resources. Who were these anti-American hoodlums, you might ask? Terrorists? Foreign governments trying to intervene in our country? The cartel? No. They were actually members of the International Longshoremen's Association, a union that has held control of the Eastern and Gulf Coast shipping ports for over 100 years. ILA members went on strike this week after their employers only offered them a 50% pay increase during contract negotiations. Now, they said that they deserved a 77% increase, actually. Now, for the record, these people typically already earn between $81,000 and $200,000 per year, salaries that are well above the national average, and their president, Harold Daggert, earns just under $1 million. But not only did they argue that they were being underpaid for jobs that I'm pretty sure we could train monkeys to do, they also argued that reality had no right to threaten their livelihood. And by reality, I do mean the fact that technological innovations, and particularly AI and automation, are poised to make their jobs obsolete, as computers can perform these tasks cheaper and more efficiently, and without all the drama we just witnessed over the past couple of days from overpaid grown-ass men. Now, most of the country treated the situation with the disdain that it deserved, but we were left with few recourses to fight back against these thugs, thanks to the U.S. government's laws that give many unions basically a monopoly-level power over certain sectors of the economy, and because we have a limp-wristed union puppet simp in the White House right now, who seemed highly unlikely to exercise the one power at his disposal to put a stop to all this madness, and that is if he was even actually cognitive and awake, which I'm not confident of. But it seems the country has been rescued in our 11th hour from the Longshoreman by an unlikely hero, one the media is probably not going to tell you about, and that hero is Mr. Florida man himself, Ron DeSantis, who rose to the occasion and fought back on behalf of all of us. Now, I think this is a story for the ages. I'm pretty hype about it. We're going to talk about all of it today, but before we do, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to my channel if you have not already, and of course, ring the notification bell so you never miss one of my episodes. So to tell the story, I have to go back to the beginning, which started last week when ILA President Harold Daggert began running his mouth in the media, explaining his forthcoming shakedown of the American people. Watch.
These people today don't know what a strike is.
Right.
When my men hit the streets, from Maine to Texas, every single port will lock down. You know what's gonna happen? I'll tell you. First week, be all over the news every night, boom, boom. Second week, guys who sell cars can't sell cars because the cars ain't coming in off the ships. They get laid off. Third week, malls start closing down. They can't get the goods from China. They can't sell clothes. They can't do this. Everything in the United States comes on a ship. They go out of business. Construction workers get laid off because the materials aren't coming in. The steel's not coming in. The lumber's not coming in. They lose their job. Everybody's hating the longshoremen now because now they realize how important our jobs are. Now I have the president screaming at me, I'm putting a Taft-Hartley on you. Go ahead. Taft-Hartley means I have to go back to work for 90 days. That's a cooling off period. Do you think when I go back for 90 days, those men are gonna go to work on that pier? It's gonna cost the companies money to pay their salaries. Well, they went from 30 moves an hour maybe to 8. They're gonna be like this. Who's gonna win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means. Nobody does.
If tasked with finding the perfect actor to play a union thug villain with possible mafia ties, I don't think even Central Casting could have chosen anyone better for this role than ILA President Harold Daggert. I mean, What a scumbag. Far from being some champion of blue-collar workers, Daggett actually lives in a 7,000 square foot mansion, drives a Bentley, and owns a yacht. But he planned to put you out of work, gleefully I might add, and block you and your loved ones from accessing essential goods unless he got what he wanted in this negotiation, which again was an astronomical pay raise for jobs that should be going away, and to block the country from accessing innovative technologies that could improve all of our lives. I really can't overemphasize how much I hate this guy and how destructive and ruinous what he ultimately wanted was. Let me explain exactly what was happening beneath the surface here, because I know there's a whole lot of fake news, honestly, that circulates around unions. Like, whenever you start to criticize these guys, I'll have people pop up in my comments like, thank unions for the 5-day work week. Thank unions that you have health insurance, as if these things wouldn't have happened without unions. And furthermore, as if the fact that the way they got them is not destructive and harmful to this day. Because thanks to unions, these things got codified into our laws, health insurance got attached to your job, and now we're in an environment where a lot of jobs should be going remote. You should be having to work far less hours. There should be less days in the office needed, because as innovation has advanced, our jobs have gotten easier and require less time, which is a good thing. Thanks, capitalism. But unions codified all this to get the government to give them this baked-in monopoly, and that's why things aren't changing and adapting faster. So no, I'm not going to thank a union, okay? I'm not. And if you want a full deep dive on why unions in the US are complete garbage, go back to my original episode of Base. This was one of the first 5-6 episodes of the show I ever made. I did an total deep dive into the history of unions in the US, the legal history, the litigation around it, the laws that have been passed. It's all in there, and you really need to understand the truth about these people. Unions can only get higher wages for their members by harming other workers and consumers around them, period. I think James Shirk put this well at the Heritage Foundation. He wrote, unions function as a labor cartel, restricting the number of workers in a company or industry to drive up the remaining workers' wages. They also retard economic growth and delay recovery from recessions. Over time, unions destroy jobs in the companies they organize and have the same effect on business investment as does a 33 percentage point corporate income tax increase. They are poison. And what's ironic is they're not only job killers for the economy at large. Over time, they tend to be the top cause of their own workers' demise as well. In fact, the vast majority of manufacturing jobs lost over the past 3 decades have been among union members. They literally strong-arm themselves out of employment. And that's because they ultimately seek to operate outside of the bounds of economic realities. One day, Democrats will learn this, or maybe they won't, because now the nationalist populist Republicans are drinking this Kool-Aid too. But you do not create economic growth and prosperity by punishing the producers. Okay, please, for the love of God, can people read Ayn Rand again? This is just basic free market economics. Companies are only going to take so much extortion, be forced out of so much of their profit before it isn't even worth it for them to operate anymore. And when you say this, you've got far left, socialist progressives, and also these nationalist hacks on the right. They're like, well, we should just force them to stay. We should just not let them leave our country. So you are advocating for slavery? You're going to force people to produce, to start companies, to take on all of the risk of being entrepreneurs just to benefit you? That's literally a commie mentality. It's unethical. It's anti-capitalist. It's extremely big government. It's in complete contrast to all principles of individual liberty. So hard no on that, okay? If you want companies to stay here, if you want more companies to be created here, therefore creating more jobs, and over time, lifting the economy, then you have to have a business and tax and regulation infrastructure that favors capitalism and that benefits the people who put all that on their back and do that. Instead, we've got an Atlas Shrugged situation where you guys think you're going to keep pummeling these people who are actually the value creators in society. And what's going to ultimately happen is they're either going to close up shop and leave, or they're going to go somewhere else besides this country to operate. And that ultimately harms all Americans. Automation isn't going anywhere, and that's really a good thing. I know that people are concerned about the forthcoming technological revolution. Newsflash, the exact same fears, the exact same talking points we're hearing right now around AI and automation have been regurgitated at every technological turn in history. At every point, they have said this is going to wipe out all jobs. Nobody's going to be able to work. We're not going to have quality jobs. But actually, what's happened in reality is that technology does get rid of some jobs, but they tend to be the bad jobs, jobs that include a lot of manual labor, that have poor working conditions, that need long hours, and mindless jobs, like unpacking shipping containers, for an example. But it replaces them with better jobs, a higher quality of life, more meaningful work, and less time required to do it. Which means as capitalism progresses, we all get to spend more and more of our lives in leisure versus working. And I get it. AI is big. It's probably going to encompass a lot more industries than we've seen with previous technological revolutions. But I do not want people to buy into this mindset that we need to stagnate innovation. We need to hold ourselves to the past. We need to prevent progress because we're afraid of facing change and innovation and things that can ultimately be very, very good for our country and for our quality of life. We will figure it out as we go. New jobs will be created, or perhaps we will find new ways of earning money that are detached from work, right? You could see a huge expansion in the arts because people have more time to devote to it. You don't always have to look at everything through a pessimistic lens. As for Dagger, by insisting that his workers be paid well above what they're worth in a sector that should be automating and eliminating these jobs, it's not only vastly stupid, it's corrupt. Because automating the ports would streamline trade, it would speed up the supply chain. It would ultimately bring down the cost of goods and services, particularly in fields where our country really needs it, like housing. So by working to stop the inevitable, Dagger and the ILA members are ensuring that the American people will suffer needlessly under inflation and outdated supply chain operations. They get rich while you foot the bill. And for the record, the US is already vastly behind the rest of the developed world on this front. In fact, the GAO did a review of foreign ports, and they found that they generally have adopted more automation technologies than the 10 largest US container ports and are more likely to use automated cargo handling equipment. So they are trying to kneecap our economy and ensure that our foreign competitors and even foreign enemies can sail past us, pun intended. You don't stay the number one superpower like this for long. All right, so now you might be asking, as I have been at times in the past, why could the companies just not fire them? Seems like the simplest thing in the world. I know if I owned a company and my workers all did this, I would be like, sayonara, see ya later, and hire new people. Hire people who want to work for these very, very good salaries that are being offered. But the reason that can't happen is because while it is guaranteed by our First Amendment, we do not actually have freedom of association in this country anymore. Freedom of association, by the way, it requires that you also have the freedom to disassociate. And thanks to some garbage laws passed by my nemesis, FDR, in the 1930s, we don't have that. Companies in the U.S. economy are not truly capitalist free market companies for many reasons, but this is one of them. You have the National Labor Relations Act that essentially says companies are not able to fire their workers when they go on strike. And not only that, like that's crazy enough, right? If I start a company, I take on all the risk, I manage to be a success at it, I hire people to work for me, and then they get together and go on strike so they can extort more money out of me, honestly, a lot of times above what the actual value is that they create. I'm not allowed to fire them and hire new workers. That's asinine. That is insanity. But it's not just that. The National Labor Relations Act also says that it's illegal for companies to try to prevent their workers from unionizing. And we've seen a lot around this recently with companies like Starbucks and Trader Joe's, which have shut down locations that have unionized or that are looking to unionize. And they've actually been investigated by the US government because it's illegal if they shut down those stores simply to avoid their workforce becoming unionized. They can shut down if they claim it's for other market reasons, which they did, particularly in places like New York City and Seattle. It's been pretty easy to do because of the progressive, crazy politics on the ground there. They're like, no, actually, we're just getting robbed to death and we can't make a profit. So they've gotten away with it. But obviously, probably they did do this in part to avoid unionization. And good, base, absolutely. I have been spending more money at Starbucks because of this, just trying to support them. This is such a corrupt scheme. There's nothing capitalist about it. It drives me nuts when libertarians are like, well, unions are free market. They're freedom of association. Not in the US. Not in the US. You cannot look at this infrastructure, at this legal backing, and say that these are free market, freedom of association entities. Yeah, maybe in some utopian world that Mises dreamed up, sure. But that's not what we're living in. So stop simping for these people. Now, even FDR, who again, I can't think of anybody I hate more in American history than FDR, but even FDR agreed that public sector unions shouldn't exist, right? He said that if you work for the government, you're getting paid by the taxpayers to perform a service for them. You shouldn't then be able to unionize against them and use their tax dollars to work against them, nor should you be able to shut down essential services that could have a massive disruption on the entire U.S. economy. And I agree with him. I don't know that I think we can absolutely ban private sector unions. I certainly think we can do a lot to reform them and make them stand on their own merit. But public sector unions, and in fact, all taxpayer lobbying should absolutely be banned. And so for that reason, it's actually illegal for public sector unions to strike. They get to exist, which I don't think they should, but it's illegal for them to strike. And in case you don't remember this, I was like a baby when this happened, but this actually came to blows in the late 1980s when Ronald Reagan was president. Because at the time, you had a union for the air traffic controllers, which is a public union, that was trying to strike. And Reagan was having none of it. Watch this.
I respect the right of workers in the private sector to strike. Indeed, as president of my own union, I led the first strike ever called by that union. I guess I'm maybe the first one to ever hold this office who is a lifetime member of an AFL-CIO union. But we cannot compare labor management relations in the private sector with government. Government cannot close down the assembly line. It has to provide without interruption the protective services which are government's reason for being. It was in recognition of this that the Congress passed a law forbidding strikes by government employees against the public safety. Let me read the solemn oath taken by each of these employees, the sworn affidavit when they accepted their jobs. I am not participating in any strike against the government of the United States or any agency thereof, and I will not so participate while an employee of the government of the United States or any agency thereof. It is for this reason that I must tell those who fail to report for duty this morning they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
So not only did he threaten to fire them, he actually made good on it. I said this was when I was a baby. Never mind. It happened in August of 1981, so I wasn't born yet. But on August 5th of 1981, following the workers' refusal to return to work, the Reagan administration actually fired over 11,000 striking air traffic controllers who had ignored the order and banned them from federal service for life. And how did it go, you might ask? Was there like a complete meltdown? Because honestly, this is the stuff you're hearing right now. Like, I'd like to see you replace these port workers. I'd like you to find a workforce to replace them. No way. You're going to see who makes this country run. It didn't pan out that way in this case. In fact, they basically brought in a lot of people who worked in the military. They started expediting their training. And by the first day of the strike, flights flew at 50% of their normal schedule. By the second day, it was up to 75% of flights. And by the third day, the labor movement was permanently crippled. This is a segment of an interview from NPR on the matter, and they say that Donald Devine, the head of federal employees for Reagan, told me that not long after the strike, this thing started happening, where businessmen would come up to me and say, you know, when your guy Reagan stood firm with those guys, I started getting tougher with my unions too. I realized I was giving away the store. They go on to say Reagan flipped the narrative on strike breaking. Strikers were no longer the sympathetic ones. Now they were selfish lawbreakers screwing over regular Americans. Joseph McMartin is a labor historian at Georgetown, and he wrote the book about the air traffic controller strike. He said Reagan's handling of the strike got into business school curriculum like quickly within a year. By 1982, there was a group at the Wharton School that came out with a manual which encouraged business leaders to learn from the PATCO strike. And this was widely disseminated, and business leaders were reading about it. Suddenly, around America, strike breaking became the thing to do. Striking copper miners in Arizona, fired. Striking paper workers in Maine, fired. Meat packers, bus drivers, so many strikes in the 1980s were broken to the point where unions realized that employers wanted them to strike so that they could fire them and replace them with non-union workers. And if you realize that your boss wants you to strike so they can fire you and rehire somebody else, that is going to make you less likely to strike, which is the main piece of leverage the unions have. The government keeps track of the number of strikes, and if you look at the numbers, you see a lot of strikes right after World War II when unions were flying high, and the numbers trend downward slowly, but suddenly in 1982, there's this huge drop-off. That drop-off is the air traffic controller strike. Iconic. Absolutely iconic. I've never been like a diehard Reagan fan. I honestly have a lot of issues I disagree with him on, but Man, don't you like miss that kind of leadership? Ugh, would kill for some of that now. But as I mentioned, employers in the private sector don't have the same ability to simply fire these people, which is what should happen to each and every single one of them. Because technically, the ILA is a private sector union. And by technically, I do mean by the skin of their teeth. Because shipping and trade at large are one of the most regulated government-run sectors in existence. I like this tweet from Scott Linicombe. He said, "We hobble our shipbuilding industry with tariffs. We hobble our shipping industry with the Jones Act, which is atrocious. We hobble our ports with the Dredge Act and union favoritism. We hobble naval procurement with Buy American. And then we're like, why is the U.S. maritime sector so weak? It must be China's fault." In a capitalist world, new ports could open up in these scenarios. New companies could start up to staff the ports. If unions were actually operating in that kind of a world, then they would, I guess, be okay. But they aren't. The ILA works in a government-granted monopoly, which is how the government often skirts its own laws to benefit its friends and get kickbacks for itself, which we see over and over and over with the Democratic Party when it comes to unions. So this is why they are able to hold the ports hostage, even though this quite obviously does pose a threat to national security. It's all because they have a government-backed monopoly. It really should be that trade is either operated by the market or by the government. The private-public partnerships are crap. It is almost always an example of crony capitalism. Now, when all of this was going on, there was really only one way to fight back against these leeches on the table, and that was the Taft-Hawley Act you heard Daggett mention in his video. And under this legislation, the president, which would be Biden, can order an end to a strike via this legislation if he or she deems the strike poses a significant threat to national safety or economic stability, which it quite obviously does. But Biden wasn't going to do that. He wasn't going to lift a finger because he is a union shill. And because the left is frankly already losing grounds with unions, because he stopped the railroad union strike in 2022. He's already lost the Teamsters, or I guess I should say Harris lost the Teamsters because of their support for electric vehicles and technology. Once again, we see unions trying to stop the inevitable. And so because the Democrat Party, I guess, has not like cowtailed to them enough, even though like the Biden administration has done so much to bend the knee for unions. It's been insane. We've been fighting them on like 10 different fronts. All kinds of bad bills and pieces of legislation and regulations behind the scenes that they've been trying to push through for unions, but it's not enough for the unions because they demand total fealty and they're not getting it. Basically, Democrats got caught between trying to like address climate change and push electric vehicles and pleasing the Teamsters and the unions who don't want it. So when you take all of that into consideration, plus the significant kickbacks that Democrats get from the unions, they were not going to intervene in the strike. And for the record, Trump wouldn't have been much better. He and J.D. Vance have been running around kissing up to unions for the past couple months. It honestly turns my stomach to see Republicans doing this. Here is Trump actually with Harold Daggett not long ago. So not great. But then, enter Ron DeSantis, stage left. DeSantis has also been dealing with the fallout of Hurricane Helene in his state of Florida, and the ports in his state were those under the iron fist of the ILA. But unlike Biden, DeSantis was actually ready to go to bat for his people and for the American people at large. Watch.
At my direction, the Florida National Guard and Florida State Guard will be deployed to critical ports affected to maintain order and, if possible, resume operations which would otherwise be shut down during this interruption. Florida Department of Transportation is coordinating calls with seaport rail and trucking partners to ensure that all are prepared and positioned appropriately to limit disruptions to the supply chain in other areas should this continue. I'm also directing Florida Department of Transportation to temporarily waive the collection of tolls and other fees for commercial vehicles using public highways in Florida and waiving the size and weight restrictions normally governing vehicle transportation for the duration of this emergency. This will help expedite the movement of goods that have been impacted from seaports to intermodal logistics centers, distribution centers, and delivery points, and very well may help offset additional costs incurred by operation during this period. Finally, I'm directing the Florida Highway Patrol to manage the flow of traffic from all Florida seaports and adjacent roads and highways as needed to further expedite the flow of goods that are currently being held up. This will include the provision of law enforcement escorts for commercial motor vehicles by FHP officers upon request. And I would say that this is something that would have significant impacts on the nation's economy anyways, but to have this happen in a way that could negatively impact people that are reeling from a Category 4 hurricane That is just simply unacceptable. So it really is incumbent upon the Biden-Harris administration to do everything in their power to ensure that these goods are where we need to be, that people are not left hanging out in the cold waiting for these goods if they're sitting in the ocean somewhere and they're not being able to be used here in the state of Florida or in Georgia or North Carolina or where people are going to desperately need this. We need to accelerate. We have no time for delays. Biden-Harris has a responsibility to stand up for the storm victims, stand up for the people who've had their homes damaged or who've lost their homes, and make sure they have what they need to get back on their feet.
This is so base. This is so Reagan-esque. Where was this DeSantis the past year or so? He drives me nuts because honestly, he tries to do this dumb thing of out-Trumping Trump, which is never going to work. You're never going to pull Trump supporters away from Trump. And what he should be doing is being this guy consistently. This guy is who Americans are desperate for. Independents like me, centrists, people who are fed up with the extremism on the left. If he would just cut the crap, cut the culture war BS, stop talking about gay people for the love of God and do more of this. I mean, oh my gosh, he'd kill it. It honestly infuriates me. I think he's got terrible people surrounding him at large that have not, I don't know. It's a whole other tangent, but honestly, his people should have been guiding him to do more of this kind of work, to focus on more of these kinds of issues, these kinds of actions versus whatever it is we've seen over the past year or two. This is DeSantis at his best. It's incredible. It's real leadership. It's real masculinity. It's actual capitalism in practice. It's problem solving. I could just go on and on and on about this. I love this. Please, more of this version of DeSantis. Just to get a little bit more into the weeds, basically he said on Thursday he was going to deploy the Florida National Guard and Florida State Guard to ports affected by the ILA strike. In an X/Twitter post, I love how they still say X/Twitter. They're never going to rebrand it to X. The governor stated that Guard members will be deployed to ports affected by the strike to maintain order and, where possible, resume operations at ports which were otherwise shut down. Disrupting the distribution of food, equipment, and supplies as the southeast U.S. recovers from Hurricane Helene is unacceptable, DeSantis said in the post. Floridians need a reliable, steady supply of resources and building materials to keep their families fed and rebuild their homes and businesses. In the post, DeSantis said the Florida Highway Patrol will manage the flow of traffic from all Florida seaports as needed to further speed the flow of goods held up by the strike. He said the Highway Patrol will provide escorts for commercial motor vehicles upon request. Unlike the federal government, Florida is taking decisive action to ensure that our economy continues to function and that victims of Hurricane Helene will have access to what they need to rebuild, DeSantis continued. And that was all it took. Within mere days, the ILA had to end their strike right after it began. And they were like, this isn't over yet, but they took their L regardless. And will they be back post-January like they claim? I don't know, probably. And America needs to be ready when they do. We need more leaders like DeSantis to finally step up to these losers and defend the market and our taxpayers and claw back the corrupt laws that are empowering all of this. And then if unions want to exist after that, cool, but they won't, because their only power comes from government force. And most Americans have already woken up to that a long time ago, which is why membership is at an all-time low. As we've passed laws like right-to-work laws after the U.S. Janus decision, since they cannot force people to join their ranks anymore, most Americans choose not to. In fact, the only unions that are really thriving are the government unions like police and teachers, which shouldn't get to exist. But I would say after this stunt, public opinion has turned even more harshly against them. People are pissed. Here's one person on Twitter: I'm sorry, it's too late. Before the strike, I had zero opinions on the state of U.S. ports and dock automation. Now I'm a radical. Now I want all the ports automated tomorrow. A managed plan for firing 90% of the dock workers, and I want Elon Musk and Mitt Romney in charge of it. Reason Magazine said the dock workers strike is over for now, but the need to automate key functions at America's shipping ports is more obvious than ever. Eric Boehm with Reason said automate the ports now. Another person said, imagine watching your country get hit by a devastating storm, seeing towns be destroyed and people killed, then deciding to go on strike and bragging about making their lives harder. Every person in that union who supports the strike is a piece of shit. They massively overplayed their hand here. I've hated unions my whole life, but like I said, I think there's still a lot of people who are under the public school indoctrination that unions are a good thing. Boy, their true character got put on display this week. It's not going to go well for them. Unions are a relic of the past. They are a dinosaur institution, and they should be left there. Otherwise, Atlas is going to shrug. This stuff is not capitalism. It is not pro-worker. And if you fall for these lines, you're kind of an NPC. This was union thuggery, government corruption, and anti-capitalism big government on full display. There was no freedom of association here. There was no common sense here. Just the American people getting shaken down and screwed yet again for backroom deals that enrich politicians and labor unions and leave the rest of us in the dust. And it should be noted that Biden and Harris were like cheering this whole thing on behind the scenes. Capitalism, when allowed to operate, ensures things get increasingly easier and cheaper and more efficient, and that more people have access to life-changing innovations. Government and their band of gangsters work to slow that progress. Take this other statement from Dagger. I really want you guys to like understand who these people are at their core. I like this newspaper summary. It says, in Harold Dagger, head of the ILA, the port managers and the rest of the country are dealing with someone who is fundamentally unreasonable. As the New York Post reports last month, Dagger fumed about the automated tolls that have been in place for a generation. Quote from him, take Easy Pass. The first time they come out with Easy Pass, one lane, and the cars were going through and everybody's sitting in their cars and I go, what's all that about? I'm going to get one of them. Today, all those union jobs are gone, and it's all Easy Pass. People don't realize it. Everybody's got 3 cars. Everybody got an Easy Pass on the window, and they go through like it's nothing, and they get billed in the mail. They don't even care about the union worker in the booth. Like, for sure as shit we don't. Are you on crack? Reporter then said, no, we don't, because we want the most efficient and least expensive systems possible to best serve the most people possible. Nobody wants to endure a slow and efficient, frustrating daily life just to preserve some stupid union job. Ugh, God. They make my blood boil. In reference to this, Jim Garrity, who is the National Review senior political correspondent, said Easy Pass was created in 1987 and became increasingly common on the East Coast through the 1990s. Think of all the time saved, think of all the gasoline saved, and think of the reduction in carbon monoxide emissions from people sitting and idling while waiting for slow toll collectors. Harold Daggert hates the fact that your life is easier. He wants you back in the mid-'80s, sitting in traffic, waiting for the unionized toll collector to count out the dimes and nickels. Democrats are going to have to pick, okay? Because not only are the unions quite obviously anti-individualism, anti-progress, a lot of what they're trying to do is going to make climate change far worse. And I think after what we've witnessed with the effects of Hurricane Helene, a lot more people are waking up to the need for real solutions when it comes to these topics, and the unions are standing in the way of that. They're standing in the way of cheaper goods and services. They're standing in the way of progress and innovations that will improve our lives. They are insisting we continue to use outdated methods that not only ruin the quality of life, but hurt the environment. These guys have got to go. Like, I am fundamentally changed by the events of the past couple of days. Like, I am fully Team Robot at this point. All in all, huge thanks to Governor DeSantis for doing what the other national leaders would not or could not. I hope other governors especially take note, because the states have a lot of power here that they haven't been utilizing. It's time to fight back and fight for the American people. All right, guys, that's a wrap. I hope you liked the episode. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to this channel if you have not already, and if you want even more content, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok.